So the name of the title of the story is Teresa. So I'm gonna read one page. A lama, as pedras e uma mão aberta, enterrada. Dois cachorros famintos procuram alguma coisa no meio dos destroços. Acima deles, um colchão amarelo se pendura nos fios elétricos. Casas em pedaços. De uma delas restou uma parede e meia de azulejos brancos. O focinho de um dos cães empurra os dedos enlameados. No dedo indicador é possível enxergar a aliança, na qual se encosta agora o focinho do animal. Ele cheira, 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 até sua boca se abrir. Teresa esperou durante 3 anos o marido. Petrúcio partiu para São Paulo meses após casar. As noivas e esposas desses homens ficavam à espera, grinaldas na mão. Muitas temiam que eles nunca voltassem. Às vezes, novos pretendentes rondavam as noivas viúvas. Algumas entregavam seios, em segredo, nos quintais. A maioria, contudo, continuava impassível. As grinaldas amarelas. Teresa se manteve fiel e continuou a vida de casa. Gostava de ouvir, todo o cair da tarde, as histórias de sua avó, enquanto a ajudava a debulhar o milho. Aos sábados, juntava as crianças na praça e contava dos mouros, das princesas encantadas e dos milagres dos profetas. Enquanto o marido não voltou, continuou a morar com os pais. Ajudou-os nos trabalhos domésticos, fez costuras, foi à missa. Todo mês, ele lhe escrevia uma carta magra. Passados aqueles 3 anos, Petrúcio retornou com algum dinheiro. Montou um mercadinho no centro da cidade, fez do quintal uma loja de aviamentos, através da qual chegava pelas laterais da casa, e que deixou os cuidados da esposa. Teresa, às vezes, se perguntava, Petrúcio tinha mudado? De brincadeira dizia, oi sulista, e o esposo devolvia o cumprimento com um sorriso que talvez tivesse certo constrangimento. Na primeira semana após o retorno, ela lhe fez perguntas polidas e adequadas sobre a vida que viveu. Os parentes agiram da mesma forma. Não seria fácil indicar o que poderia ter mudado. O senso de humor, uma das suas maiores qualidades, era o mesmo. A voz, só um pouquinho diferente, com algo carregado no sotaque, algo do sul. Ainda um bom partido. Apesar disso, alguns comentavam que seus gestos e palavras careciam de espontaneidade, como se o passado puxasse, de maneira lenta, porém teimosa, os braços de Petrúcio na direção de uma história escondida debaixo do tapete. Uma história inconclusa. Teresa cada vez mais acreditava. Petrúcio fingia. Como se tivesse desaprendido de si e estivesse à procura do que se tinha perdido no percurso, na estrada. Às vezes, ela achava que ele temia algo. Uma tarde, já grávida, um carro circulou pela cidade e alguns estranhos fizeram perguntas deslocadas pelas ruas. Petrúcio, por coincidência, tinha feito uma viagem repentina às cidades das proximidades. Petrúcio gostava de passar parte do seu tempo livre observando a rua, sentado à janela. O cigarro na mão esquerda, os vivos da fumaça transformados em garras, enquanto sua mão direita enrolava e desenrolava os pelos do próprio bigode. Os olhos mergulhados nas pedras, esquinas e bichos. Naqueles momentos, ele fumava demais, mesmo para um homem, pensava Teresa. Logo após a partida dos filhos, os dois se hipotecaram. Aquele antigo e ansioso silêncio da espera voltou, desta vez transformado, calcificado. O silêncio, após ser abafado com as brincadeiras, o corre-corre, os choros, as doenças e os estudos dos 3 filhos homens, retornou com toda força quando a primeira velhice surpreendeu Teresa e Petrúcio. Novamente sozinhos, novamente à espera. This one here, from there until, sorry, until here.
Yes, yes.
Okay. And I'm reading a lot of days in English, and for me it's really strange now to go back to the original language that I wrote. Well.
But also I'm noticing in the Portuguese edition it's divided up into
in numbers.
Yeah. How did that decision?
This was a suggestion of you guys from Granta, and when I wrote the story, I used these numbers to divide the parts of the story. And this is a kind of influence of Osman Lins, of this writer, of this Brazilian writer. But I wasn't sure that this was the best solution for my story. So when you guys made this suggestion for me, I wondered, okay, let's try without the numbers. Let's see what the readers can say to me. And in the final edition, in the ultimate version of this story, I'm gonna decide if I'm gonna use the numbers or if I'm gonna throw them out. Vinicius thinks that maybe it's better without the numbers, right?
Without the numbers,
yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. So he's the critic.
Because if with numbers, it looks more like book. Are you reading a book? And without the numbers, it really looks like a voice that you're hearing.
I think that when you made the suggestion, you told me that maybe the numbers were much more a kind of noise.
Interesting.
Rather than a kind of aesthetical effect, really.
Because isn't the Michel Laub divided up into, that's divided up into numbers.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, it's the different ways you guys have approached this sort of multiple voices and kind of parallel voices and styles that run through each of your stories. Well, anyway, should I let you hear?
Yeah.
So from the mud.
Yes, from the mud. Yeah.
The mud, the stones, and an open hand, buried. 2 hungry dogs are looking for something in the middle of the wreckage. Above them, a yellowing mattress is hanging from the electrical cables. Houses and pieces of one of them, all that remained, were 1.5 walls of white tiles. The muzzle of one of the dogs nudges at the muddy fingers. On the index finger, it is possible to see the wedding ring, which the animal's muzzle is now touching. It sniffs, 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 until its mouth opens. Teresa waited for her husband for 3 years. Patricio left for São Paulo just months after they were married. The brides and wives of these men would wait, garlands in hand. Many feared that they would never return. Sometimes, new suitors would prowl around the widow brides. Some of these women would surrender their breasts, in secret, out in their backyards. Most of them, however, would remain unmoved. The garlands turned yellow. Teresa remained faithful and continued with her domestic life. She liked, every nightfall, to listen to her grandmother's stories as she helped her to husk the corn. On Saturdays, she would gather the children in the square and tell tales of the hills, of enchanted princesses and the miracles of the prophets. While her husband did not return, she continued to live with her parents. She helped with the household chores, she sewed, she went to Mass. Each month, he wrote her a slim letter. When those 3 years were over, Patricio returned with some money. He set up a little greengrocer shop in the center of town and transformed the yard into a haberdashery store, which he reached by going down the sides of the house, and which he left in his wife's care. Teresa wondered sometimes, has Patricio changed? As a joke, she'd say, "Hey, Southerner," and her husband would return the greeting with a smile that perhaps had a little awkwardness to it. The first week after his return, she asked him polite and appropriate questions about the life he'd had. Where had he worked? Where had he lived? And had he left behind any friends? Their relatives behaved in just the same way. It wouldn't be easy to say just what it was that might have changed. His sense of humor, always one of his greatest qualities, was just the same. His voice, only a little different, somewhat accented, something southern. He remained a good catch. He didn't drink cachaça, and he was still a hard worker. Despite this, some people commented that his words and gestures were lacking in spontaneity, as though the past were slowly but stubbornly pulling Patricio's arms towards a story hidden under the carpet, an unfinished story. Teresa believed it more every day. Patricio was pretending, as though he had forgotten himself, and was in search of what had been lost on the journey, on the road. Sometimes she thought he was afraid of something. One afternoon when she was already pregnant, a car drove around the town, and some strangers asked odd questions around the streets. Patricio, as it happened, had taken a sudden trip to the nearby towns. He came back a day after the visitors had left, and for several days the couple exchanged few words. Patricio liked to spend some of his free time watching the street, sitting at the window, a cigarette in his left hand, the twists of smoke transformed into talons, while his right hand curled and uncurled the hair of his own mustache. His eyes deep in the stones, corners, animals. In those moments, he smoked too much, even for a man, thought Teresa. Soon after their children had left home, the two of them put themselves on ice. That old, anxious silence of waiting returned, this time transformed, calcified. The silence, after having been smothered by the playing, the rushing about, the crying, the sicknesses, and the studies of the three sons, returned at full strength when the beginnings of age surprised Teresa and Petruchio, alone again, waiting again.